everybody, and welcome to another Seasons on Saturday, one of our special follow ons to the previous sessions, this time focusing on special interests. And to join us today, we have Paul Airbands from Kentucky with our resident team member, Chuck Walker. And Paul's going to talk to us about the importance of the hit albums in the Four Seasons history. So over to you, Paul. Tell us what we need to be aware of and need to know about the original vinyl.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I appreciate you setting this up today so that we can participate in this Four Seasons on Saturday. The purpose of this is I was a little bit distressed, and we've discussed this offline several times, that both the hardcover book and the box set and also y'all's previous Seasons on Saturday Zoom meetings and podcasts did not really cover the greatest hits albums. Admittedly, today with the release of the box set, some of them are superfluous, but I think at the end of this 30-minute session or less that I think you'll have a better appreciation of some of the various albums that were released around the world that feature the Four Seasons' biggest songs and the ones we all know. Starting off, the very first Four Seasons album that was is a greatest hits album is, of course, this one from VJ. This is a Golden Hits album. This is one of the rare stereo copies. This was issued in August '63. Now, as we know from our Four Seasons history, that's a period where the Four Seasons actually sued VJ because of lack of payments, or as some people say, Bob Cruz sued VJ. I've never really gotten the exact dates straight on that. You may know that a little bit better, but be as it may, VJ went in and put together a really good album. This thing went to number 15 on the bestseller list. It contains all their big hits on VJ and most of the B-sides. And to make it even more appealing to the people who had bought the singles or probably the previous albums, they do make it a point on here that it has the million sellers and a couple of new ones to delight you, their fans. And of course, those new ones were Star Maker and Silver Wings, which would show up on other VJ albums later on. Since it was issued in '63, the original label had an oval on it, but this thing stayed in press. Matter of fact, VJ kept pressing these albums along with the Christmas album right until they went bankrupt. And so some of the albums have the bracket label on them, which was the last one that was used just before they went bust. Also, it was the bracket label albums that showed up in one of the rarest Four Seasons albums, primarily because of its notoriety with the Beatles, is of course the Beatles versus the Four Seasons, which all it was a Please Please Me album and copies of the Golden Hits. What makes this thing so extremely...
Yes. Paul, I think it might have been with the Beatles album, not Please Please Me.
Yeah, no, it was Please Please Me because with the Beatles was on Capitol or EMI. Yeah. The only thing that VJ had rights to was the Please Please Me album, which was known as introducing the Beatles in the United States.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It sold tremendously in the UK and really set Liverpool alight.
This one's extremely rare though, this packaging, because they only sold 20,000 in mono and 750 in stereo, but they didn't reprint labels or anything. They just stuck the Golden Hits of the Four Seasons album into a Beatles cover, basically. So that's probably the rarest one. Now, it was issued all over the world by various companies that licensed stuff. Now, the Netherlands copy was on Fantana, and it had a custom liner notes that was different than the one that was used in the United States and a lot of the foreign countries. Chuck Walker has one of the foreign releases. Chuck, tell us about it.
This is the release from New Zealand. It's on the Allied label. And being that New Zealand was such a small country, this is probably one of the rarest to find of any of the albums. It contains the front and back from the U.S. pressing, but the album is listed on Allied instead of the VJ markings, and it plays the same as the VJ mono pressing. This is the VJ mono.
And that's one nice thing about VJ. They went ahead and sent tapes to their foreign licensees rather than having them dub them off of the 45s or albums that some labels would do. They'd send overseas those and then have other people dub off of the album. So the foreign copies in a lot of cases are actually sound better than the VJ ones because VJ was notorious at some of the vinyl they used sometimes, especially on the singles. I won't get into that, but I had a collector friend tell me once that the singles sounded like they was pressed on parking lot asphalt. And I think that's one of the best descriptions I've ever heard. Ken, do you, that album, as far as I know, did not come out in Britain.
No, not as far as I'm aware. I didn't really pick up on anything other than the singles and the EPs that were issued in the UK on VJ. And basically, it was a very low key investment by the 4Seasons, by VJ into the UK market. So we didn't get much other than the singles. So my collection comprised an EP and a couple of singles,
which I believe was on the stateside label.
Yeah, it was stateside.
UK, right?
Yeah.
And stateside, the VJ 45s, as I understand it, sound pretty good on there. Stateside was notorious as one of those labels that distributed a lot of one-offs from the United States. So VJ was one of their biggest licensors for sending stuff over there.
Well, sound quality on the stateside 45s was incredible at the time, but we were only playing it on ordinary mono, 1950s, 1960s stereo record players.
Right, with a 3-inch, probably with
simple dance set type record players.
Yeah, probably with a 3-inch speaker or something in it.
Yeah.
Well, where there's one good album that sold extremely well, like I said, it was number 15. That was the highest ranking for any 4Seasons album at the time, and it held that record up until the Phillips era. So if there's one good album, they're going to come out with another one. So a year later, they came out with more golden hits of the 4Seasons, but it only has 2 hits, and most of the rest of it is filler material. The 2 hits, if you want to call them that, would be Stay and Long Lonely Nights, which is on this album. And
that come out, Paul?
Do what now?
When did it come out in the USA?
It was 1 year later.
In 64.
Yeah, this is 64. But believe it or not, they were both on the charts at the same time. It's got the
VJ style
bracket labels on it and so forth. And it's actually a fairly good album, but it's mostly album cuts from their various albums that, like I said today, this album really doesn't have a whole lot of merit as far as keeping it in your collection.
No.
Now, one of the rarest albums that I've got from this period that came out right after that More Golden Hits was a Canadian album called The 4Seasons Volume 1. Now, this is on the Rio label, which is a little bit unusual. They were the licensee for VJ in Canada. And this is the first, it's titled 4Seasons Volume 1, but there was never a Volume 2, and there was never another album on the Rio label under the Golden Treasure series. I don't know if they got into licensing problems or what, but it's really kind of neat because like the other Rio Golden Treasures Rec 45s that's got a gold label on it, which I always like to see that. It doesn't cost these record companies very much. And this goes along with their Golden Treasures single series, which also had gold labels. I have one of these around the house someplace, but I haven't been able to find it. So that's a pretty rare album. Now, what they did is they took the tracks from Golden Hits, which they did issue in Canada. Rio issued that one. And then they took the few hits off of more Golden Hits. They dropped the Sherry B-side, I've Cried Before, and dropped the 2 new songs off of Golden Hits, and that gave them room to add on a few others. Now, I'd like to use this as an honorable mention when I've talked to Chuck about this. When people mention the 4Seasons, you say, what's your favorite 4Seasons song? 90% of the time, I think they're going to come up with a girl's name. They think automatically Sherry, Dawn, Big Girls Don't Cry, Marlene, Connie O. So VJ, after the 4Seasons left the label, made a very interesting album. And this has actually been one of my favorites over the years because it collects all the VJ girl songs on one album. Now, this is one of the few VJ albums, other than their hits albums, that does not show the group on it. Instead, they've got girls on there. This is very much like what the American group The Ventures did on their albums. They were an instrumental group, somewhat like the Shadows in Europe. And so they would go ahead and put a picture of a model on the front. Of course, our boys are on the back. So you're not missing out on anything in a black and white picture there. VJ was very good at marketing stuff after they no longer received new material from the group. So is there any last comments that you all have on the VJ period, Ken?
Yeah. Most of these albums that came out were in competition in Europe against the Phillips material, and it was a bit of a struggle for VJ in the UK to really get enough promotion. They did promote they did promote one hits album, but I can't recall which one it was. But I never saw it. So the first 2 albums that we saw in the UK in any volume were Dawn and Ragdoll. And so by this time, VJ's efforts were all totally concentrated on the US market and the fact that there was such a big base of fans following on from Sherry album and Big Girls Don't Cry. Isn't that the same way as it was in your area, Chuck?
We got all the albums starting with Sherry, just kind of coming through on a regular basis. They would show up in the record stores. I think the key that I think about the VJ records, the VJ albums, is the stereo albums. The stereo albums were more difficult to find than the mono albums, and they were mixed differently than the mono albums. So if you wanted a true stereo copy of the songs, you had to find the stereo version of the album, which today are extremely rare and have finally been reissued in the box set.
Yes, the two main songs, well, actually the 4 main songs off the Golden Hits album, Sherry, Peanuts, and the 2 new songs are all in the box set and in great stereo. So we have Ken to thank for that.
Yes.
Moving on to Phillips, I guess. Now, to me, this is probably the best 4Seasons cover I've ever seen. This is a gold vault of hits. Yeah. You've got a first class cover, you've got a great title, and the picture on the cover actually matches what the title says. And it just flat out tells you this is the gold vault of hits, and you've got the 4Seasons set in gold vault, or that's what it appears.
It lists all the tracks as well, Paul.
Yes, it does.
There's one hit that's not a hit on there, and that is Betrayed.
It was the B-side, though, and it was the B-side of a very poor release they had called
Toy
Toy
Soldier.
Soldier,
Yeah.
which didn't sell very well, and I don't even think I wouldn't even classify it as a hit. But I'm glad that they included it on here. The Phillips singles were pretty good quality, and but if you wanted the original singles on an album, this is what you went for. And what makes this album still good to have today, even though all the songs have been issued on other compilations, and even this album has been reproduced on CD a few times, is a great photo. If you want something to hang in your office or in your stereo room, this is about the best you're going to get right here, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Does that feature Charlie Calello?
Yes, he's on the cover of both of them. There was 2 editions in the United States, and the first one has got Charlie Calello on the back cover, and it's got a blank spot for another album. Now, the reissue album has got an updated picture with Joe Long on the back, and they show the second Golden Vault of Hits on the back, so that
well, that was part of the main marketing push now, because you've got 6 albums listed on the back of that,
right,
on the back of that sleeve, and that was really encouraging people to go out and buy all the albums.
Well, not only that though, Ken, Let's Hang On makes its debut on an album on Gold Vault of Hits. And Chuck has got an unusual pressing of that, Chuck.
This is a pressing from Taiwan. It's on the first record label. It's probably by most considerations called a bootleg because it was an unauthorized version. It has a floppy cover with more of a golden picture rather than the original picture, probably so that wouldn't violate some of the copyright that they were trying to avoid. The back cover is got the identical liner notes, with the exception of missing the Phillips ID as the original issue. But what's most interesting is the record was pressed in red vinyl.
Wow.
So it's a red vinyl version of the Gold Vault of Hits. It was pressed in Taiwan. My understanding was that it was the company that did them did a lot of records out there that were American releases, and their primary target was the U.S. Armed Forces stationed in the bases in the Far East, where they would drop it off at the local marketplaces for the GIs to buy.
Yeah.
But I find it's interesting because it's the only 4-season record that I've ever seen that is pressed in a colored vinyl.
Yeah, that's a great issue. One of the things that looking at these albums and looking at the stereo versions compared to the mono versions, and like these hit albums, Paul, is that the stereo versions I've only just noticed because we've now got the mono and the stereo issued in the box set, and we hadn't heard these when we were doing the research, is that the stereo versions are actually pseudo stereo, listed on some tape boxes as fake stereo, but it was a technology of the day to simulate stereo, and it's not a bad job in terms of broadening the mono sound that they had on hits like Let's Hang On, and some of the other earlier sides that were only ever done in mono. And they've come out, I think, pretty good on the stereo albums. I don't know what you think, Paul.
Yeah, but I've always wanted the mono albums simply because I grew up with the mono mixes, and as a DJ, a former DJ, these are the ones that I was so familiar with. These are the Phillips double-sided hit series.
Yeah.
And they specifically mention on here Gold Vault of Hits, which has been, believe it or not, the best-selling album ever in the 4Seasons catalog. We're running out of time. We're running out of time, so I would like to move on to the second vault if I can. There's not a whole lot on this one. The first album, Gold Vault of Hits, went gold and sold enough copies to be certified by the RIAA in 1 month. This one took over a year, and the reason I think is because 9 of the tracks on here are the former VJ sides, So the new record buyer was not getting a whole lot new if they already had the VJ album, Golden Hits.
Yeah.
The picture that was on Gold Vault of Hits I thought was fantastic, and it was used on a UK release called Seasoned Hits. And this is the same cover. It's not the same contents as Gold Vault of Hits. In fact, there was 2 editions of this, and the second edition has which was issued a year later, same contents as the original album, but it shows the 4 Seasons standing by a tree. Now, I haven't figured out where this picture was made yet, but Tony is the one that pointed out that a decade later, after this album came out, the Time Barrier Express used the original photo on the cover of their magazine, complete with the whole forest. The main part of the forest had been cut away for the album cover. But those are both basically UK issues, although they were also sold in Germany and other places. The book in the box set does make one mistake. They say that Phillips marketed their albums throughout the world, but that's not quite true. They did it in mostly English-speaking countries and the countries of Germany and Japan, because Germany and Japan had large concentrations of soldiers that spoke English. This is Ken's favorite album, which there was more, at least 2 editions, maybe more. This is the first edition with the red 4, and then after some fancy lettering around here. It says 4 Seasons. A lot of the record stores complained to Phillips, says it looks like a Christmas album. Yeah. So Phillips went ahead and redone it with simple lettering and a white 4, which is a more common copy that you find online. I'm not going to say much about this, but I do want to point out that my copy of the original is a DJ copy. And what makes it unusual is it has a gold label on it.
Right.
Oops, there we go. Gold label. I think that looks so neat. I wish they had just gone ahead and put the gold label on all the release versions. It's actually just a 2-color label, so it probably costs less than the regular Phillips label would, because it's multicolor.
Yeah, well, its release in the UK was 1969, but my pressing was 1972, and I bought it specifically because I bought my first stereo radiogram, then as they call them, and was blown away by the quality of sound of that particular pressing, and still to this day it sounds an absolutely superb pressing. And that's something I wanted to just raise with you and Chuck about the pressing. And just before we have to finish, is there anything about the pressings that you want to highlight that make them sound better today?
Probably something that frustrates me the most. I got lucky and had the opportunity to write the liner notes on the CD release for Ace.
Yeah.
And in working with the Ace people and with Bill Englert to try and find the original tracks to put on the album, I finally realized that many of the tracks Bob Crew had redone a new mix in stereo, because a lot of the mixes in the original versions were not mixed in a true stereo. They were mixed in a fake stereo, or they were mixed in just mono. So it has some of the cleanest copies of the songs on any album I've ever seen, and it truly is it's probably the most representative work of the group. 4 Seasons were never known as an album group; they were known as a singles group, and it represents the entire '60s period of time when the 4 Seasons were having all their hit records. They had very few successful hit records after that, but the Edizione d'Oro has got the crown jewels of the 4 Seasons.
It was a definitive version, and the several upgraded or unique versions you've identified, Paul, many of them first time in stereo, is an amazing piece of work by Crew. Don't you
It
agree?
truly is, especially Dawn and Ragdoll. The mixes on them, I think, are just incredible.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have them. And that was one reason why, of all of the choices of the albums you've mentioned, Paul, Edition Doro, because it's not been released in its true and full form, had to be included in this box set. And it
Yes.
does stand out as a superb hits collection, notwithstanding that we've got the other albums as well.
If you want a collection of hits by the Four Seasons, it's the album you need to have. It's the must in stereo. The interesting also thing is the album was only pressed in stereo, and I think it was brought out by Phillips because that was the time when the record companies decided to delete their mono catalog and just simply go straight stereo. So it was an opportunity for them to take Four Seasons songs, and the Four Seasons weren't selling real well on the singles at that point in time, to reissue another greatest hits album and make money off of what had previously been released, only with a new version of stereo sound.
Right. So before we finish, Paul, just a mention of a couple of other greatest hits albums that stand out from the rest, which I think the 70s gave us. Do you know what those albums were? The greatest hits collections from the 70s? What do you think?
Well, I just wanted to mention two others before I close down with Four Seasons Story, because Four Seasons Story, there's all these albums, at least the American ones, the Gold Vault of Hits, second Gold Vault of Hits, and the Edition del Oro, all sold 1 million copies and were certified by the RIAA. There were other albums, like this is one from Mexico, which uses a picture from the Genuine Imitation Life Gazette period. That's from 1970. And another European album from Phillips called The Big Ones, which has a combination of songs, mostly Phillips, but it's got the 3 big hits from BJ also. Now, the 3 million sellers, I should say, from BJ. Private Stock went out of business while this one was in release, so it never got certified by the RIAA, although I'm probably certain that it did sell 1 million copies, or the 500,000 necessary to get certified, because there's just so many of them floating around. And I sent you a newspaper article out of Billboard once saying that they had to sue the record company in Canada, Quality, because they kept issuing the album after Private Stock went out of business. And it's because Private Stock went out of business that it never got certified. And the other album, of course, that did not get certified gold, which probably went gold, was the Golden Hits album. But that's because VJ did not submit their sales reports to the RIAA in the same fashion that Motown did not. Yeah. Some of the Motown albums have been verified as RIAA certified gold, but it's been done after Berry Gordy sold the label. Yeah. So those are basically the greatest hits. The only two that I can think of that honestly a Four Seasons collector today needs is because of 2 different reasons. Number one, Golden Hits is still the only place, other than if you have the original Sherry single, that you can get the B-side, I've Cried Before. Yeah. And the thing that a lot of collectors point out on the Four Seasons Story, which makes it critical, is the mixes are different. A lot of the tracks are the same ones that used on Edition del Oro, but when it came out in the early 70s, there was more of an interest in making the mixes more stabilized towards the center, and these mixes are more narrow.
Yeah.
But
there was a K-Tel issue in the UK and Europe, which I think probably also did extremely well in terms of sales, because it was
It did. Now, I don't know about in Europe if they can be certified there or not, but in America, since it was sold by television and mail order and not in traditional stores, it did not qualify for an RIAA gold certificate.
Right. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for this great session, which has highlighted all the greatest hits albums that were out on vinyl during our early lives. And this has been a great session to share with the fans on 4Seasons on Saturday. Very informative. And as usual, Paul, you are the ace collector of vinyl. So thank you both.
Closing comment, this is the Canadian version of the 4Seasons story, and it has a different front label with 2 discs highlighted on the front cover. There were a lot of these sold in the U.S. after the private stock issue was no longer available in the U.S.
Yeah, well, I'm tempted because there's a new vinyl record shop here in Chester, and I saw a 4Seasons album in there the other day. Frankie Valli is the word, and I thought to myself, I've got to get a new record player and start playing vinyl, because we need to go back and just hear how good those pressings were.
Yes.
There's still lots to discover. So thank you for your time, and thank you for this contribution to this session. And let's hope that the fans of Seasons on Saturday enjoy it as much as we have presenting it. So thank you both for your contribution, particularly you, Paul, because it's rare to get you in Kentucky coming out of the backwoods and appearing on screen. So many thanks.
Out here in the sticks of Kentucky, but I thank you for the invite.
Okay.
Ken, thank you for all the efforts you've had over the years to finally get the complete catalog issued in one place. We
That's
appreciate
okay.
that.
I'm probably burnt out by it all, but we'll keep going. Okay. Thank
All
you,
the best.
guys. Speak to you soon. Cheers now.